Good morning, everybody, and I'd like to welcome everybody present to the Chamber and those listening online on the Lincolnshire County Council Audit Committee YouTube channel. Quick introduction, my name is Councillor David East. To my right is my Vice Chair, Councillor Robbie Woods, and I'm assisted by Tom to the left here. I will try to ensure that members have a good opportunity to ask as many questions as they want and make a contribution today. Can I remind councillors and everybody in attendance that we're required to turn the microphones on and off for the loop system. We will now move on to the formal agenda. First of all, item number 1, apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chairman. None received.
Okay, thank you. Item number 2, declaration of members' interest. Do I have any declarations? Okay, none seen. And item number 3 is the minutes of the previous meeting. This item is to approve just for the correct record and points on accuracy. Do I have a proposer? Yeah. Councillor Bunny, thank you. And a seconder? That'll be me. Thank you very much. That's all agreed. Okay, so we now need to vote on that. Those in favour? Those against? And any abstentions? Thank you. That's carried. Yeah. Okay, items of business. First, item number 4, the annual audit and opinion report dated the 2024 to 2025. And this will be given by Claire Goodenough.
Good morning all, I hope you can hear me okay. I assume if you can't, someone will tell me. So very pleased to present my annual opinion and report to the Council for the financial year 24-25. This report follows the same format which was introduced last year and uses evidence as the majority basis for the opinion and professional judgment as a low contributor. During the collation of the relevant data, I was lucky enough to get positive engagement across all the directorates, which made the review much more efficient in its collation. As part of my preparation work, I reviewed the definitions introduced last year and deemed that no adjustments were necessary, and this allows the committee to review this report against last year's submission for that ease of comparison. My overall opinion is on page 25, which is giving an adequate assurance as assessed against the criteria spread across pages 24 and 25. The report includes a summary overview of the areas awarded negative assurance ratings, along with additional observations on governance, risk and control. I did not issue any no assurance awards to the Council during the year. The delivery style and quality of audit work allows me to analyse the findings to inform root causes, which are categorised, and these are included in the report for your understanding. I'm pleased to report that the feedback received from our internal quality questionnaires for the assurance work delivered across the year has been consistently excellent, with 100% of recommendations being accepted by management and draft reports being delivered in a timely manner. This hopefully supports the quality of our work alongside the team's understanding of topical improvements and subject knowledge. There have been no quality issues during the year or deviations from the 2017 public sector internal audit standards, and no attempts by management to influence or suppress any findings. Appendix 1 on page 34 provides a list of assurance topics reviewed throughout the year, along with the independent assurance ratings that were awarded. Very happy to take any questions about the report, the process or our statutory obligations which underpin the report.
Thank you, Claire. And are there any questions for her? Andrew Middleton.
Thank you, Chair, and morning, Claire. I'm very distraught to see that the primary school I attended, Fiskerton, is in deep trouble with you. But seriously, how comprehensive is your offer to assist such schools, and is there more to be done to make them more willing to accept guidance so they don't get into trouble from your audit work?
So good morning, Andrew. So there's that fine line between the independence of audit and supporting schools. So what we can't do is we can't solve their issues for them. What we do as an audit team in general is we provide tips that go out on a monthly basis to the schools on areas that we see repeatedly, where we see failings, but we aren't able to get involved in the rectification of any of the risks or areas that we see concerns. We work with our colleagues in governor support and schools finance to share our reports with them, to give them the heads up and the themes that we're seeing across the year for all the schools, not just the no assurances, but the limited assurance, as well as the positive areas that we see. So we keep within our boundaries for impartiality and independence, but we support where it's appropriate for us to do so. And when we go back and do our follow-up reviews, we will often do a pre-check to let them know what we're going to look for, and sort of give them ideas of the evidence that we would expect to see in place. So we support them as much as possible. So I hope that answers your question. And I'm really sorry, it's your old primary school. Hopefully it's nothing to do with your attendance, Andrew.
No, I did think the dinner money collection was perhaps dodgy, but thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Councillor Bunny has a question.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, similarly, Andrew's just picked it up because I was concerned about the schools which are listed on page 34. I'm assuming that the schools listed are the ones which were actually investigated or audited, and that there were others who might not be audited who could well have fallen into those lower to limited and no assurance with their accounts, particularly some of the smaller primary schools. It's very difficult when you've got a very small staff to keep up to date with all that. And I was just wanting to make sure that every school was being checked.
Thank you, Councillor Bunny. Yes, they're the schools that we visited during the year. So during that financial year, we have our schools on a 3-year programme. So we visit every school across a 3-year cycle. So we started last year. We started the previous year. And I think from memory, we had something like 7 or 8 limited assurances and 1 no assurance. We had 4 or 5 substantials, and then the rest fell into the adequate area. The report that you're looking at now was the 2nd year, and the year we're in currently is the last year of our 3-year cycle. So by the time we get to March 2026, we will have visited every maintained school within our remit. We then follow that cycle again based on a risk-based approach. So we do our follow-up reviews and our re-audits on those with no assurance and limited assurance first. So I can assure you we do get across all of our maintained schools during the 3-year cycle.
Thank you, Claire. Councillor Carrington has a question.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Claire, thank you very much for the report. Couple of points, really. First question is, it's extremely good to see that basically we are in good shape. I note on page 27, you go back a little bit in time and say that the risk arrangements in the council were audited in July 22. And the independent report stated that basically we were in the top 10% of local authorities, and I wondered whether we are still there or thereabouts. And my second question, on page 29, you discuss contract award and exceptions, and the report tells us that there were some small problems in that the internal audit review identified that there were no established processes for maintaining the council's contract register and exceptions register with contracts recorded outside LCC's software. And I was just curious to understand, why would anything be recorded outside our software envelope? What was recorded outside it, and what actions are being taken to address that?
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Carrington. So to take those in order, in relation to the risk audit, because I oversee risk management, I'm not able to audit my own area because I'd like to think I'd give a good assurance and it might not be deemed as independent. So we have to commission an external provider to do that assurance review. We would normally do that between 3 and 5 years. So it hasn't been revisited again since 2022, when we were in the top 10%. However, during that time, we have continued to develop our risk management process across the council quite significantly. And we are in a much more informed and sort of council-wide area of understanding for our risk work. So it will come into the cycle for either next year or the subsequent year, but it will definitely be revisited externally before we get to the 5-year point, which will be 2027. Just in relation to the contracts register, I can't tell you why they sit outside because we don't necessarily, or I don't necessarily hold that level of information. I can tell you that we had a process that wasn't necessarily being followed. So people were keeping contract details within their own area as opposed to uploading them to the central area. I can confirm that steps have been taken by the Assistant Director of Procurement to make sure that people are aware it has to be submitted. They've done some work looking to link the contract review with the financial processes. So that's their double check to ensure that they've got all the information there. We are due to do a follow-up review later in this year on this, and I'll be able to report what action has been taken from an independent stance at that point. Obviously, we aren't involved in the work to correct what we find. We just then go back and do that verification. Hopefully that answers your question.
Very much so. Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Chairman.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Claire. And just one question from me. I can't see your crutches in the picture. Are you off the crutches now?
Unfortunately not. I didn't want to go for the sympathy vote, so I've laid them on the floor, but they are still here.
Oh, well. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Any further questions? Okay, Councillor Roberts.
Hello. Yes, just a quick question, and I'm apologies if it's already in the paperwork. What about academies? Because I do find it, obviously, schools that we have academies and we have ones run by LCC. Is that independently audited? Thank you.
So we do offer outsourced services to academies. As academies are separate entities, we don't report them to the County Council. We report them to their Board of Trustees. So that is outsourced costed work that we do. So we have individual contracts with academies that we review on a regular basis, but there would be no benefit to the council because they don't fall within our control. They don't fall within our systems and processes, and they don't use our policies. So that's why we undertake the work, but we don't report it here to the County Council.
Thank you, Claire. And Councillor Locke.
Morning, Claire. There we go. Morning, Claire. You actually stole my question partially there. Just further on that question about academies, does that get publicly reported so that information is also in the public domain? Because they're also in receipt of the same funds that our local authority schools are.
So that's a decision for the entity to make. We make a recommendation that it goes through their equivalent of the audit committee. There are occasions, depending on what we find, there are occasions when myself or the team will present at their audit committee equivalent. It is entirely up to them what they do with that because they are separate entities. We make a recommendation, but it's entirely up to them whether they follow that or not. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you. And Councillor Bunny.
So, sorry to just come back on that. Claire, am I right in saying that the academies don't need to use LCC for the audit? That is if they choose to do so, but they can go to alternative providers if they so wish.
That is absolutely right. They have a choice. We don't currently actively canvass those. These are academies that we have relationships with from prior auditing. So it is a growing area. So we audit a number of multi-academy trusts. And again, that stays within that multi-academy circle. It is entirely at their discretion whether they want to use our services or whether they want to use a separate organisation. Academies are duty bound to make sure that they have adequate scrutiny and levels of checking in place, and that does fall in part of their statutory accounts they approve at the end of the year, but it doesn't have to be us.
Thank you, Claire. Any more questions? Councillor Kelly.
Thank you, Councillor. Are the
I'm sorry, a point of order there. We actually can't accept a question from you there.
Yeah, apologies. We can't accept a question from the executive at this committee.
Any other questions from anybody else? Okay, before we vote on this, I just need to highlight the recommendations that the committee considers the content of the head of the internal audit's opinion and report and any other actions that they may wish to take, and review the work on the internal audit delivery of the internal audit plan, evaluating the overall effectiveness and internal audit functions in discharging their responsibilities. Proposer? Councillor Bunny, thank you. And seconder? Councillor Davis, thank you. And now, those in favour? Those against? And abstain? Okay, thank you. That's carried. Next order of business is the Information Assurance Annual Report, and this will be given by David Ingham. Thank you.
Good morning, Chair. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. The Information Assurance Annual Report captures activity across three key strands: records management, information security and data protection. Throughout the year, our primary aim of our work has been consistent, and that's to enable colleagues to deliver their services in a safe, secure and lawful manner. Starting with a very positive indicator, requests for support and engagement from across the Council have continued at very high levels throughout the year. As expected, the majority of support given to those areas processing the most sensitive information, primarily children's and adult services. Why is this a positive indicator? Over the last 12 months, it's given us more opportunities to promote good practice and good governance, more opportunities to help colleagues identify and manage information risk, and importantly, helps to demonstrate accountability for the information we use on a daily basis. Increased demand has meant some challenges for the team, and therefore it's been important that we prioritise team resources, making sure staff were focusing their efforts on the areas that presented the greatest need. Despite these challenges, we've consistently met our performance targets for response times to both support requests and security incidents. If I may, Chair, I'll just cover off a couple of key points and commentary across each of the three strands. Starting with data protection, we'll start with the key event of the year. In the spirit of openness and willingness to improve, we agreed to be subject to a consensual audit by the Information Commissioner's Office. This is the UK's independent regulator for data protection and freedom of information. The audit focused on three areas: governance and accountability, training and awareness, and records management. The outcome was that the ICO had a reasonable level of assurance that processes and procedures are in place and are delivering data protection compliance. That is a 0.3 on a 4-point scale. Regarding the information assurance team, the auditors stated that they found evidence of a strong and knowledgeable information assurance team that adopts an innovative and iterative approach to data protection, effectively meeting the needs of Lincolnshire County Council and data protection legislation. Considering the scale and diversity of the information we use on a daily basis, the variety of services the Council delivers and the size of the team, we're very pleased with this outcome. There is still room for improvement, however. The report contained 29 recommendations. One we did not agree on, but of those that we did agree, 1/3 have already been completed, the remainder forming a comprehensive action plan agreed by the ICO. Looking at wider formal contact with the ICO, data protection complaints increased from 5 to 8. 4 were upheld by the ICO, all were resolved by the Council. None caused significant negative impact. Looking internally, our data protection officer carried out 36 investigations into data protection infringements. 6 were upheld by her. Again, all were resolved. Obviously, any complaint is unfortunate. However, complaint numbers are very low considering the significant amount of personal data we process on a daily basis. Moving across records management, again, the ICO recognised the effort we're putting into resolving historical challenges, acknowledged we had thoroughly assessed our risks, and they supported our long-term plan. Within the report under records management, you'll see reference to the ongoing project to review hard copy records across the estate and held in off-site storage. The project continues to make excellent progress, and we have now reviewed over 335,000 individual records, and of those, 20% have been destroyed, so we've destroyed around 90% of records. Those that remain are subject to better governance. This work's helping to reduce retention backlogs and improve compliance. We've also initiated work last year across the digital environment, for example, working with technical colleagues to see how we can embed records management principles into the SharePoint infrastructure. This will ultimately help colleagues better manage their digital information. And then finally, on information security, starting with security incidents, unfortunately, there has been a 10% increase in confirmed security incidents. That's now up to 352. Analysis shows the usual trends, the main cause being human error, the main type of incident being misdirected information. That's wrong email to the wrong person, wrong letter to the wrong address. And this reflects national trends as reported by the ICO. Despite it being the main incident type, we have seen a reduction of 18% in the number of incidents caused by misdirected information, and that reflects the work of the team over the year to engage with colleagues to understand more about this risk and to improve the controls. Context is important, I think. 352 sounds like a big number, but if you consider the millions of communications we send every year, the millions of pieces of information that we manage and handle throughout the year, 352 in context is a small number. We also continue to encourage open and transparent reporting. So even the most minor incidents continue to be reported, and this is reflected in the numbers. It's interesting to note that 97% of all reported incidents had a negligible impact on service delivery and individuals. As I said before, very positive that colleagues are reporting these incidents, the minor incidents, but it does push the numbers up. Of all of those incidents, 2 data breaches were reported to the Information Commissioner's Office. It may be helpful to know that there is a threshold which, if met, requires us by law to report these incidents, and this threshold is informed by risk to individuals. One of those incidents related to unauthorised access to social care records, and one related to a misdirected communication. On both occasions, the ICO was satisfied with the Council's response. As with data protection complaints, any reported security incident or data breach, regardless of its nature, is recorded and fully investigated with recommendations on reducing similar incidents. That covers some of the key points, Chair. So in summary, we've got good evidence of high demand for IA services and advice. This in turn is good evidence of an IA-aware culture. We have a positive result from the IC audit, and we have evidence of continual improvement, which remains a key feature of our work to ensure we remain an effective and relevant service. Hopefully you found the report useful. Happy to respond to any questions. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, David. Any questions? Ian?
Thanks, David. I suppose my question around the security incidents was, it's always a very positive thing. We're working on reducing the number of incidents, etc., and especially when our colleagues raise them themselves. How many did we have where actually they weren't raised, either A, quickly, or B, the colleagues, and actually there was another source that raised them? That there was that small nub of potentially people weren't raising them. So again, it's a positive culture, but identifying when we don't have that positive culture. Does that make sense?
I don't have that number on me. I can certainly get it to you. But what I would say is the vast majority of incidents are reported by the individual themselves. So not their manager, not members of the public, not other stakeholders, but by the individual. And I think that just supports the idea that we are transparent and open in reporting. I
agree, and I think that that's actually a useful contextual number that if we can find it, I think just that source would be really helpful. Thank you.
Certainly.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Davis.
Thank you. Just 2 questions, really. On the hard copy project, be interested to know, what does the timeline look for that? I mean, I don't envy whoever's going through all the paper files. Be interesting to know. I guess at some point you'll get to a business as usual point. And my second question, kind of following on from Ian's point behind, is I think some kind of benchmarking would be useful in terms of, you know, what is a typical authority being subject to in this size? Because it's such a large number. relatively, but compared to the number of transactions, for example, in terms of security breaches, etc., I think it would be useful to know what does good look like and where are we on that scale, because otherwise all we have is a direction of travel, and you could end up in a stage of saying, well, enemy becomes excellent becomes the enemy of good. We could be investing so much effort into going from 2 incidents to 1 that it's not cost effective, but without knowing the scale, that's hard to justify.
Thank you. In terms of the timeline for the records management project, it's a very good question. So we've already reviewed 355,000. We know there are at least under $500,000 in off-site storage. We are focusing efforts this year and certainly next year more on off-site records so we can get through the backlog more quickly. There are some records we're not aware of yet, and that's why it makes defining a timeline more difficult. In terms of the second point, really good question, actually. There is no national trend data other than the ICO data, which talks about the type of incident and the nature of incident. What we find is many local authorities underreport their security incidents. The only data source at the moment is FY responses. So if an individual or the media put an FY response and that data is then published, we appear on a chart somewhere. That doesn't necessarily reflect how many incidents the local authority has. I feel, and my personal perspective is that we are very, very good and very open about those, so we will be near the top. There are other authorities currently reporting 0 data breaches in a year. I don't believe that, I'm afraid. But I'll certainly do a more recent trawl and see if there's any comparators we can use to sort of give you some context around that data, if that's okay.
Andrew Middleton.
Thank you, Chair. So I weighed up whether to ask this as being too picky by half, but I'm pushing at a positive culture with you, David, clearly. So 332 human error causes is, on the surface, disappointing, albeit in the context of several million transactions. Could further training get that figure down?
Yes, so we have a policy in place. We have a large amount of training in place. Our mandatory training was undertaken by 97% of the organisation, which is fantastic for training. We do all sorts of awareness and education with our colleagues. Mistakes will always happen, unfortunately. I think if I point to the 18% reduction in the number of misdirected communications, that shows where we focus our efforts in a particular area, we are able to bring that number down. So yes, we can do more, but there will always be mistakes. I don't think we'll ever remove that risk.
Thank you very much. Councillor Roberts.
Hi, David. You mentioned one of them was a breach of medical records, I believe. Was one of the breaches that you mentioned access to medical records? I get that correct?
Access to social care records.
Social care records. Was that something that was actually a criminal act, or if it, and also was what safeguards now put in place to stop that from happening? Thank you.
It wasn't deemed to be a criminal act because the individual had legitimate access to the system and to the information, but it wasn't access for a business purpose. That individual eventually resigned, having been subject to an investigation by the HR. As with any incident, we always review controls, so we have both proactive and reactive controls in place. Again, where an individual has access to records, there's always the risk that they may take a look, but we do review every incident to make sure the controls are robust and are relevant to the processing activity.
Councillor Locke.
So I was just going to start as I am a DPO with another hat on in another environment. I'm quite reassured and pleased to see some of this, transparency. It is encouraging. We do live in a real world, and we are humans. We do make mistakes. Could you touch on why there's still a 3% gap in, say, the training? What sort of category would that fit? And do some of the breaches come from that 3%, or are all the reported things from the 97 on a training layer? Does that make sense?
We haven't analysed the data this year, but certainly last year, of all the incidents caused by individuals, 99% had undertaken training that year. So that's not a cause, that's not a key factor, sorry. Can you just repeat the first part of the question?
So you touched on 97% of
yes,
staff
yeah.
have been trained and have the ongoing training, so that leaves 3. It's just where is the spread of incidents coming from? Are there any in that 3? What are the 3?
So the 3% tends to lend itself to people on long-term absence. So, for example, maternity leave. There may be people who are with us at the start of the year but then leave the organisation partway through that year. So there's a number of reasons why we have that 3% gap. But I can give you assurance that throughout the year we are constantly reminding colleagues to undertake that training. There's information and communications comes direct from Andrew as Senior Information Risk Owner to encourage people, and we regularly report that information to managers who themselves encourage staff to do that. There was always going to be a small percentage, very small percentage of people who just don't do it, and we need to find out who those people are and encourage them to undertake the training. But there's normally a variety of reasons for that.
Yeah, and are you delivering a training through some online portal where you're capturing that, so like a training module?
Exactly. So we have a mandatory e-learning module, which is online, so we can accurately capture the data. For those who don't access training via computer-based, so it might be people who are doing, I don't know, lollipop ladies, for example, or men, there are alternative methods to deliver that training. We don't capture records for that, however, and that's one of the points raised by the ICO, and it's something we are investigating further.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Carrington.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Going back to something we referred to under a previous agenda item, an awful lot of what this council does is done with external partners. And I'm thinking particularly in this case of things like adult social care, which you've mentioned, children's care. There's a lot of sensitive data flowing around, but it is not exclusively under our control. How do we manage the architecture of that in a way that not only protects this council, but tries to extend the protection we offer to the individuals that we serve?
Yes, you're absolutely right. So although the data is passed to a third party to process on our behalf, the risk still sits with us. So from an information assurance perspective, there's 3 levels of activity that we undertake. We ask the supplier to give us written assurance about the controls they have in place. We ask for independent certification, for example, 27001, which is an information security management system, which demonstrates good security management around that. And we also ensure that the contractual obligations put on the supplier are good and proper. Within those good contractual obligations, there is a requirement on them to report regularly on their security status, but also to report any data breaches or security incidents as soon as possible. So we have a multi-layer approach to gaining assurance from external parties. If an incident does occur with an external party, as I say, they're required to tell us, and we work with them to understand the nature, the cause, etc., etc. So we don't manage it directly, but we shadow manage it to make sure they are doing what they need to do to give us the right information.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, everybody. Any more questions? Okay, before we vote on this, I just need to highlight the recommendations are information assurance activity for 2024-25 and the key activity for demonstrating that the IA function remains effective. Can I have a proposer? Thank you. And a seconder? Thank you. And we'll take a vote. Those in favour? Those against? Abstain? Thank you. It's carried. Next item number 7 on the list is the external audit, Lincolnshire County Council Pensions Fund 24-25, and it will be with Claire Welbury.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everyone. This report presents the indicative external audit plans for 24-25 for both Lincolnshire County Council and the Lincolnshire Pension Fund. Rash and Sophie from KPMG have kindly attended this meeting today and are happy to briefly talk through both audit plans and to answer any questions you may want to raise. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we've got 2 reports on today's agenda item. The first is the external audit plan and strategy for the year ended 31st of March 2025. So What this document aims to do, it helps us discharge our responsibilities under the Act, various bits of ethical standards and international auditing standards in terms of communicating to those charged with governance regarding the external audit plan. So when we produce a plan, we don't do that as step one. We have to do a lot of work about understanding the entity. So we undertook walkthroughs of your key business processes. We look at how you pay people salaries, we look at how you pay creditors, we look at how you value assets, we look at how you do bank reconciliations to get an understanding of how you basically do the key processes that end up with numbers in your financial statements. We then sit back and we document that and we think about some of the key decisions we need to make as part of that audit. Over on page 91, the first of those key considerations is regarding materiality. So in terms of materiality, we've set materiality at 2% of expenditure. I think I mentioned earlier in the training, the auditing standards allow you to go in a range of 0.5 to 3%. We've settled on 2%. That's actually a fair reflection in terms of the sector, level of expenditure, and forming an amount that helps us perform our audit and provide a true and fair view in terms of your financial performance, our opinion on them. We then think about our performance materiality. So we don't just go around, look at the accounts for errors at only £27 million. We design our audit procedures to detect errors which in aggregation could lead to a material misstatement. So we've set performance materiality at 75%. Last year, that figure was at 65%, basically because there'd been some delays in previous years in terms of the audit processes. And that was quite wide in terms of public sector, in terms of local authority accounting. Plus, it was our first year, so we're getting an understanding of officers, of our experience of auditing the accounts. Based on that experience from last year, the fact that there was limited errors, the fact that there's been a consistent finance team, so there's been no significant churn in your finance team, which could lead to more errors because there could be weaknesses in the control environment. We've increased that to 75% in line with auditing standards, and we're at 20.2%. In terms of misstatements that we'll identify in our year-end report, we've set that level at 1.35 million. That's our quantitative threshold. If there's anything of a qualitative nature, we think that's below that level, but actually it may be appropriate to raise. So senior officer remuneration is an example of that. We will raise that in our year-end report. We then move away off materiality and we start thinking about significant risks. So what are the key risks in your audit? So over on page 93, we've identified the key risks of valuation of land and buildings, valuation of post-retirement benefit obligations, and management override. Now, management override is a standard risk. Sophie's going to go into each one of those. We've then also identified some other risks. Valuation of investment properties. This doesn't quite reach the status of a significant risk, but it's notable, and it involves significant judgments and estimates as well. So we've raised that then, and then we've identified the adoption of IFRS 16. So in producing your accounts, officers and you as an entity need to comply with accounting standards. The Code of Accounting Practice is adopted for 24-25 International Financial Reporting Standard 16, which is on how you account for leases. So as a local authority, you will enter into many leases, and we need to undertake work around those to make sure you've appropriately identified all of those and then accounted for those in accordance with IFRS 16, which is a change to how you previously reported. So Sophie's going to pick up a little bit more detail on that. Now, we only identify significant and other audit risks here. You'll notice we haven't said anything about payroll. That doesn't mean we don't look at payroll. We just assess that as a base risk. So we'll still undertake testing over payroll. So we'll still do a selection of payroll sampling. We haven't looked at we haven't set quoted accounts payable. So the routine expenditure you will pay out. That doesn't mean we don't do any work on that, but actually that's more of a base risk, and we'll undertake some, we'll still undertake work on that to address, to ensure the accounts are free from material misstatement. Now I'm going to pass you over to Sophie, who's going to just take you a little bit more detail on each of those significant risks before returning back to me.
Perfect, thanks Rash. So as Rash mentioned, I'll take you through the 5 risks that we identified in this audit. So the first one is over the valuation of your land and buildings. So within page 94 of the pack, you can see, as at the balance sheet date last year, so the year ending 2024, the council had land and buildings with a value of 670 million. So if you put this into the context of materiality, this is highly material. Additionally, there are significant judgments that are made when the value of land and buildings are valued. So, for example, in the buildings that are held by the local authority, these are valued under what's called depreciated replacement cost, and this is because there's effectively no free market for those kinds of assets. Within that, a build cost indice will be applied to each of these assets, and that is one of the significant judgments. So what Rash and our team would do along with our specialists is we would look to see whether the appropriate build cost had been applied within the year. There's also significant data that goes into that, so floor plans. Are the floor plans being used by the local authority correct in applying that valuation? One thing to note is that the local authority prepare their valuations on a rolling basis across 5 years. So we would only expect to see around 20% of the buildings actually valued by an independent valuer. The remainder of those assets are then what we would call indexed. So it would be based on build cost indices again, but on a more general scale. So our significant risk lies primarily with those assets that have been valued in year, because that's where the judgments are being made. And the remainder of the assets we're broadly comfortable with because we've viewed those indices in years gone by. So the bulk of our work will be focusing on those assets that have been valued in year. To test that, as I mentioned, we'll work with our valuer to look at the indices and the data that sits behind it, but we'll also hold conversations with the valuer that's appointed by the council. So this year that's Kia Services. Moving through to the next slide is management override of control. So that's page 95 of the pack. So for those that go to a lot of audit committees, this slide might be one that you've seen before because this is a presumed risk under the standards. So you would see management override of controls in every single audit plan. So this is because management effectively are in an incredibly unique position to misstate the financial statements to create fraud, effectively, to change their position if they so wish to choose so. Where we believe that there'd be the most opportunity for this is in estimates. So for example, where it may be a bit cloudier in how management have come to that number, or the posting of journals. And this is because management in theory could post a journal directly to the ledger, which could change the financial statements. One thing to note in the case of the council is that they use BW, Business World, to prepare their financial statements. What we identified in last year's audit is that there's actually no segregation of duties controls over that system, which means that if somebody who had access to the ledger wanted to post a transaction, it wouldn't need to be reviewed before it got posted. We take this into consideration when we're doing our testing, and what we would seek to do is look at your whole transaction basis and identify what we'd consider high risk, so where there's any combinations which look unusual or whether there's things that just don't necessarily look right. For example, if Andrew was posting journals, we would probably want to look at those. So that is something we will come back to when we report at the end of the year. Moving through to page 96 of the pack is the valuation of post-retirement obligations. So effectively that is your LGPS scheme. And again, this is a highly material number that's within the financial statements, and much like the valuation of land and buildings, is created based on lots and lots of different assumptions, and a very small change in those assumptions can have a very material impact on your financial statements. Again, much like the valuation of land and buildings, Rash and I don't do this work by ourselves. We engage our pension valuation specialists and actuaries to undertake that work because they have more expertise than we do. We'll be looking at those assumptions that go into that valuation, and we would effectively benchmark that against the KPMG expected estimates within the creation of those numbers. So there are significant risks, but I will talk through our other audit risks that we've identified. The first being the valuation of investment properties. So if you were in the same audit committee 12 months ago, you would have actually seen that this was a significant risk, but we've undertaken work over the last year to really understand how the valuation of investment properties is created for the council. So the vast majority of the investment property held by the council is actually farmland. And the way that farmland is valued is very non-complex in nature. It's effectively 2 or 3 estimates that can be identified and agreed back to external confirmation. So although it may seem like a large number of 114 million, the likelihood of a material misstatement because of the application of incorrect estimates, we don't see that as significant. So we do see that as an other audit risk. So we would still come to this committee and report against the work that we've performed, but we don't think that's a significant audit risk this year. And finally, our final other audit risk is the adoption of IFRS 16. So the council is a little bit behind the corporate world in the introduction of IFRS 16, which puts us in a really good place in understanding how IFRS 16 should be adopted, because we've seen it in the corporate world. One thing that we would look to understand is the processes that the council have gone through to make sure that the leases that are in scope of IFRS 16 are complete. So one thing that I'm very happy to report is that the council are incredibly well placed. They've done a lot of work to prepare for this, and credit to Claire's team for doing so. So as part of our testing, we'll look at those processes to see how the council have prepared, how they've identified those leases, and then what kind of assumptions they've used to create the numbers that go into the financial statements. I will pause there for any questions.
Any questions? Councillor Davies?
Yeah, thank you. Firstly, I mean, the big question is, does Andrew know how to post journals on Business World? I mean, that's terrifying. I've watched Andrew using a computer before, so I'd be nervous about that. Couple more serious note. I think we've had 3 or 4 reports this morning, each that seem to be presenting the risk model in a different structure and format. I wonder whether or not it'd be more useful just to agree a standard. In terms of the scope, I notice there is some reference to the previous year's internal audit, but you use the phrase "won't place reliance on it." I'd be keen to understand what that means. Is there a formal kind of process whereby you review things from previous years that go back into this audit? And also in terms of bringing other things into the audit, where do we stand on kind of national issues cropping up? All of a sudden people started talking about something. You know, it's cropped up in another council. Do we need to look at it here? How does that feed in? Where do whistleblowers come along? How does that feed into the external audit? And my final question, in terms of valuations, particularly of LPSG, but also land, do we ever stress test those valuations against where, for example, we sold a field? You know, do we go back and say, well, our audit said, you know, this field was going to be worth, our internal valuation and external valuation said this field was going to go for, you know, £15,000 an acre. Actually, it went for 25, or it went for 7. Do we ever look back and kind of stress test that valuation?
So if we go to the internal audit one, so under UK accounting standards, we can't rely on the work done by internal audit. So by that I mean, if they've tested payroll and they say everything is absolutely fine in payroll, that doesn't mean we can't look at payroll. We can't be satisfied with the numbers within the financial statements. What we do as part of our audit procedures, and it's more of a risk assessment procedure, is we would look to see the work undertaken by internal audit, and we would consider whether that actually impacts our risk. So if going back to payroll is a great example, if internal audit had identified 10 high-risk recommendations, they said that all of payroll controls were not working effectively, that would make Rash and I consider whether we need to adjust our risk when we're determining the risks over the financial statements. So that is how we would use internal audit's work to facilitate our risk assessment, which is how we identify the risks within your financial statements.
I'll try and pick up the remainder of the questions, but do remind me if I miss elements out and stuff. So you mentioned regarding whistleblowers and other issues cropping up. So this is an audit plan. An audit plan, you know, there's a little note in somewhere about its risk assessment. Risk assessment is an iterative process. So if something cropped up elsewhere we suddenly became aware of, that means just because we've written this, we don't not consider it. Yeah, it will be absolute something that we consider, because there can be emerging sector-wide issues and so on and so forth. So you mentioned earlier, like Icelandic banks and stuff like that. So, you know, that I remember I was auditing when that happened and stuff. So I remember how we considered that. You know, just because it wasn't in a plan, it doesn't mean we don't consider it. Other people raising issues. So you know, in terms of our remit is very clear in terms of the account side of the audit and our value for money duties and the additional responsibilities which are presented on at the training sessions. So there is set times when people can raise questions to the authority around the accounts and to the auditor. I think the council's just about to do that, and you'll notice on their website, so they can raise issues with me. I will then be in touch with them, explaining my remit and seeing if any of those issues fall within my remit, and if not, directing them to other people, because sometimes people can raise service type issues to me, and that could be a complaints procedure process, or it could be a local government ombudsman process as well. So, you know, there's other avenues which we can point people in direction, but of course, you know, people do have a right to raise things with us as well. In terms of our valuation work, so you mentioned around stress testing and checking if those valuations are right. So one of the things we do, so the valuations in the accounts for certain assets are not what we'd call market valuation. So if you mention, you know, because for a school, for instance, there's no open market for the sale of a school in existing use. You know, no one's going to buy a school in existing use in Lincolnshire typically, or you know, it's only Lincolnshire County Council. So it's valued at a depreciated replacement cost, as Sophie reported. Other assets are held at a market valuation, and what we're doing there is absolutely looking at the latest market valuations. In conjunction with our values, we're looking at land prices, if it's a parcel of land. So what has other recent land sales been? If it's office accommodation and it's not specialist office accommodation, which again would be DRC, we'd be looking at market valuations. So our valuers do have access to that type of data and recent sales data that we can then challenge the council's valuation and their valuation. So I have a public sector organisation that actually has a hotel. So my valuer actually had sales of hotels in that geography, which is absolutely is useful for me to challenge that entity's valuation of hotels. So we will pick that up. I think one of the other questions was around the risk diagram, and so I suppose in terms of, I think you're referring to page 93 of the slide pack, where we talk about potential impact on the financial statements and likelihood of material misstatement. And I suppose here we're looking at something differently to what you're thinking about in terms of managing your risks. We're thinking about the risks focused on the financial statements, but you can see there in terms of likelihood and impact, there's some common threads there, but it is very much standards driven in terms of the auditing standards, in terms of what we're trying to portray there.
My point there, it was more for us, Mr. Chairman, is just that if we could adapt a standard so that, high is top right, low is bottom left, there is a danger otherwise that when people are reading it, if you're not paying huge attention to the detail, you may not see it, because it's the outliers in all of these things I think we need to be most concerned with. So it's that extremity. So just a bit of standard, maybe, not much effort for us to change ours to meet the national standard.
Council, I'm conscious there was a number of parts to your questions. Did that cover all of them? Okay. So in terms of taking the remainder of the report, and I think I was going to pick up from Sophie, over on page 105 is the value for money approach. So this is our responsibility to assess whether there are significant weaknesses in the council's arrangements to secure value for money. We do that by looking at themes of financial sustainability, governance, improving economy, efficiency and effectiveness. So our first step is to do a very detailed risk assessment. At future audit committee, we'll be bringing that detailed risk assessment where we'll articulate your arrangements over securing financial sustainability, over your governance arrangements, so how you improve the economy, efficiency and effectiveness, and we'll identify any risks of significant weakness that we're required to do any further work on as well. And then at the end of the year, we'll produce our commentary alongside our audit opinion, concluding on those. There's a few appendices I do want to cover. Basically, the timeline in terms of the audit on page 110. We'll be receiving signed financial statements soon. We'll start our audit of those financial statements during the summer months, and we aim to be in a position to report our final outcomes from our audit in the November audit committee, and then sign off shortly thereafterwards. Just note the statutory reporting deadlines actually the end of February. So even if there's issues, because during an audit you can come across issues, there's enough contingency there, hopefully, to deal with those. That's not saying there's any issues at the moment. Over on page 111, are our audit fees, prior comparative to the previous years. Our audit fees aren't set by us, they're set by public sector audit appointments. So local authorities a few years ago were asked whether they wanted to opt into the national scheme. I think at the time PSA reported something like 470 out of 475 of the local government bodies opted into that scheme. We procure with PSA, they then appoint auditors and they set the fees. So that's the fee scale they've set. They do write to you ahead of the financial year, so they would have written to you last autumn asking for consultation on fees. Our fee this year is £316,000. That does seem a rather large jump compared to the scale fee, the statutory audit fee of 290. But if you see the prior fee variation of 17,000, that was for implementation of a new auditing standard, which PSA hadn't input in their scale fee. That's been compounded, so you won't get a ISA 315 fee variation this year. The other fee variation last year, which says here subject to PSA fee variation process, has now actually been approved by PSA, was because you implemented a new ledger system. We needed to get comfortable with that new ledger system. And we did that work last year. We're satisfied with the work we've done, so that fee variation will not occur unless there's an issue with the general ledger system, but no indication of that. So that's your fee there. There's a new account auditing standard, ISA 600, this year. It's mainly impacts on group accounting. There's a little bit of considerations which we're finalising over that. I think any impact of that's going to be limited here, if at all. So we'll be finalising that as we complete that, get to the end of the planning phase of the work before we start the final phases of our work. Over on page 112, we confirm our independence. We're required to be independent. So that's not only in terms of fee terms, but actually also in terms of personal relationships. So nobody on the local audit team, for instance, can even be a school governor within Lincolnshire. So we've got to show that level of relationships. I cannot have, people on the audit team cannot have personal relationships with officers and so on. There's obviously the fee points there. The only additional work we do tends to be around grant certification, whether it's teachers' pension return or I think a major capital works, the transport scheme as well. But that is work that typically the auditor would do, so it's kind of assurance related and has no impact on my independence either. So, and then finally over on page 115, how can you rely on the work of KPMG? So we talked a little bit about our QA process, so some of the things that happen behind the scenes as well. I'm more than happy to take some questions on the remainder of that document before we get on to the pension fund audit plan.
Councillor Roberts.
Thank you. A question for you, Rash. I hope it's in the right time to ask the question. Regarding property that's owned by LCC, there was a old school that was sold in Horncastle, and the money, part of the money was kind of half promised to go towards some youth project or actually to build some play equipment. My question is that money for that property, does that go straight into the coffers of LCC, or is that actually any part of it ring fenced, or does it just go straight into the coffers of LCC?
So I'll take part of the question
Yeah.
there, and then I'm sure officers can jump in, because I know there can be restrictions on different types of capital receipts as well. So in terms of we'll you know our own, there's a line in the financial statements that looks at disposals. Where you dispose of assets, we look at whether that's been properly accounted and that whether it's been accounted for, and that gives a true and fair view. Often when we look at that, we look at whether some of that money is being, whether that money can be 100% retained by the council, or whether it needs to be paid back. Sometimes a council can sell assets which maybe it's grant funded. But without knowing the specific details, I can't answer the specific point, but officers may be able to help you. But in terms of our accounts remit, it's very much, there'll be a line in the accounts that says disposal of property, plant and equipment. We'll materially get comfortable with that, and if it's picked in the sample, we would consider any ring fencing requirements, but it does depend on materiality.
So so any property sale, we have a capital receipts budget, and any property sale will go into that capital receipts, and at the moment that is being used to fund capital expenditure. Any expenditure decisions are made quite separate to any sale and capital receipts. So if there's a decision made that we want to do something there, that would be a separate decision, and that would go through our normal decision-making process. So hopefully that helps with the decision. There are some restrictions on some education property and things like school playing fields and things like that, where there's an element that has to go back through Secretary of State decision and elements like that. But that would be, individual properties would have individual requirements around DFE approvals.
Thank you. Any further questions? Ian?
It's more of an observation and a thank you, which those lot over there, no, they don't get very often. So the IFRS 16, I was talking to Rashio and Sophie earlier, I think that's actually a good piece of work done by the team. The lead in, everything else that was involved to start getting to the process, we talked about it. There's two main areas I have concern. One is completeness, which we're making good progress on, and the other is if there's embedded leases involved in certain activities that we have. And again, the confidence I'm getting speaking to them is good, and it's improving. I hate to touch wood, but this is actually probably the first year in a long time where we haven't had a already known significant event impacting on the audit timetable. We've had delays due to we've had transitions of auditors, we've had new legislation coming in that we weren't prepared for. So it will be good to see if we can get through this from both sides in a reasonable time scale, notwithstanding the usual things and the hiccups that will come up, but actually to not know we have a big one hitting us at this point is actually quite reassuring for a change.
Thank you very much. Any further questions? Okay, before we vote on this, the recommendations are that the... sorry, Rash, I think you had a second part, didn't you?
Yeah, apologies.
Yes,
A little bit more from me still. The council is also the administrator of the Lincolnshire local government pension scheme. So that requires a separate audit opinion. That is over on page 119 of the document. Similar style in terms of, same approach to planning, doing a lot of work around understanding the systems and processes. We then sit back and think about the key decisions we need to make. We set materiality at 1% of the valuation of the pension fund, so that's 34 million. So that's a different scale because we're there using assets as opposed to expenditure, which we did at the council. We then think about the risks within the pension fund audit. Over on page 123, we have have the similar diagram as we had in the local authorities audit plan, which explains those, and there's some detail. Management override, as Sophie explained earlier, it's a standard significant risk. There's nothing specific I need to raise with you other than the same journal control weakness Sophie mentioned earlier. Page 125 onwards really talks about the valuation of different types of assets, level 1, 2 and 3 investments, and them being misstated or them not being completely or accurately recorded in the financial statement. So those are the key other risks in terms of the pension fund audit. You may have noticed on page 133 there's a different team involved in the pension fund audit. That audit, it's a pension fund audit. It's auditing investment asset values. It requires different skills, so we use a different team at KPMG to do that work with access to different specialist teams and different bits of valuation software and tools as well. Over on page 134 are our audit fees in respect of the pension fund. There and again, same basis in terms of being set by PSA as well. And this time cycle around the audit of the pension fund is there. We've actually just about started the final audit work because officers prepared the pension fund financial statements and released them to us. We started that audit work. That work is going to plan, and we'll be in a position at that November audit committee to produce our year-end report in terms of the pension fund audit as well. And page 136 for completeness, our independent statement, which happy to take questions on again.
Any questions? Okay. With that then, the recommendations that the Executive Director of Resources recommends that the Audit Committee considers the 2 external audit plans and identifies any further information or actions that may be required. Can I have a proposer? Thank you. And a seconder? Thank you. And those in favour? Against? Abstain? Thank you, that motion's carried. Next item, number 8, is the annual governance statement, and we're going to go back to Claire Goodenough for that.
Thank you very much, Chair. Excuse me, thank you very much, Chair. So the annual governance statement is a statutory document which outlines how the council conducted its business against lawful and proper standards for last financial year. So that's April 24 through to March 25. Whilst I present this to the committee, I'm not the author of this document. So I facilitate the completion of this document, with each principle listed within the document being overseen by the relevant assistant director or head of services. So these sections aren't drafted by me. For my part in the report, I complete a review of actions, minutes, meetings, and any available reports for me, which I assess against the SIP for Solace Good Governance Framework. And this is the report, and the report is the outcome of this review that I carry out, alongside details inserted by colleagues. The framework, the SIP for Solace framework, was shared with all the contributors to make them aware of what aspects need to be considered where they can demonstrate conformance. So I draft the framework which the assessments are made against, and I believe these would capture any significant issues had they occurred within the year. The definition not only allows for me to make a fair assessment, but it also allows for the committee to understand what would constitute a significant issue if it arose. There is no guidance that comes in from SIP for Solace on what would be deemed a significant issue, which is why I think it's important we have a definition here. I've benchmarked that definition across other county councils as well, and nobody had anything that deviated significantly outside that definition. I believe the evidence that I've seen and what's shared in the report demonstrates that Lincolnshire County Council had good governance practices in place for 24-25. During the year, no governance issues were raised with the monitoring officer or myself. And adequate action has been taken to address the improvement areas that identified in last year's annual governance statement, and there are no further areas suggested within this year's statement. I have to add, this is probably the most unremarkable annual governance statement I've ever written, but it does reflect the governance environment that was in place in 24-25. Very happy to take any questions about the process or about the report at all from anybody.
Questions? Councillor Davis.
Thank you. Thank you for the report. It makes interesting reading. I'm just trying to get my head around about what a significant governance issue is, because previous in the agenda we have talked about issues around transparency codes, around some of the reports talk about PCI compliance, and I just want to understand why they don't feature in this report as significant. I need just, where does that threshold, how does it kick in?
So I think it relates to the significance across the whole council. So, for example, something that would stop the delivery of our corporate objectives would be considered whether that would be a significant issue. Something that required money that was earmarked for something else to be diverted to address that issue, that would be dignified as a significant issue. Things going not according to plan in relation to an internal audit or an assurance rating given, without meaning to sound manual, is a little bit business as usual. They're areas that need to improve within areas of the council, but aren't significant enough to impact upon a deviation of funds, for example.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions? Councillor Bunny.
Thank you, Chair. Just a very quick one. I noticed in one or two places we've been given percentages of being met or not being met, but we haven't actually been given the actual number. And I think sometimes it's useful to have a base number so we actually know what we're talking about. Something which might come out as 1.3% might be very small or could be quite large. I'm looking at the SEN on that one, but I think it was actually with highways, it mentioned it to me, where we were talking about the percentage of C-grade roads which have been done, but no indication of really what that meant in terms of mileage and so on. And it would have been useful just to have had that base information.
Thank you, Councillor Bunny. I'll certainly mention that to the authors for next year so they can give you that additional information and make that extra clarification for you.
Thank you, Claire. Any further questions? Okay, the recommendations that the committee considers the annual governance statement for 24-25 and agrees that it accurately reflects the governance and arrangements in place for the period 2024-2025. The statement includes any significant governance issues and key risks that would expect to be published, and approves the AGS for the inclusion in the statutory accounts being amended if any relevant matters during the external audit review process. Can I have a proposer? Thank you. And a seconder? Thank you. Those in favour? Against? Abstain? That's now carried. Thank you very much. Next item is item number 8, the Audit Committee Work Programme, and again it's back to Claire.
Thank you very much, Chair. You'll be sick of hearing from me. So the work plan outlines the timing of the reports coming to the committee and includes any training and information plans as the year develops. The forward plan tends to remain fluid throughout the year, and I would work with the Chair during the year as training needs are identified or additional information would be helpful to be shared with the committee, reports need to be updated, that type of thing, so that the end purpose will ensure that the committee meets the requirements for its effectiveness and that council members are also aware of what their responsibilities are and they have the training to be able to deliver their responsibilities. So this is sort of iteration 1. This is as we sit here today. I would expect June, July and September to be kind of the penciled in version, and then that's where I'd work with the Chair for the future ones, just to make sure that we are giving you the level of assurance that you're looking for, the right types of information, and making sure that what you're taking away from the reporting elements is giving you that assurance you're looking for.
Thank you very much. Obviously, the recommendations to review and amend the Audit Committee's work plan, ensuring that it contains the assurance areas necessary to approve the annual governance statement. Any questions with this? No? Everybody in agreement with the statements made today? Thank you very much. That concludes today's meeting, and thanks everybody for attending, and enjoy the rest of the day.